Hey, everybody, welcome back. We're going to do a deep dive on Pink Floyd's Hey You. And we're going to be looking at it through this music review from the people over at iBlue on Vinyls. Have you seen their YouTube channel? It's pretty good stuff. They do these deep dives on classic albums. I think you'll really enjoy this one. They don't just break down the song. They look at its meaning, its placement on the album, and even why it was left out of the film.
Yeah, it's really interesting. They start by acknowledging how iconic Hey You is, but then they kind of immediately challenge us to think about it in the context of the whole album, The Wall. The Wall tells the story of Pink, a rock star who's dealing with some heavy trauma and slowly isolating himself from the world.
Okay, so for anyone who hasn't experienced the full The Wall journey, it's like this. Pink's building a wall around himself, brick by brick. Each song is another brick, representing different experiences and emotions that pull him further into isolation. By the time we get to Hey You, the wall is complete, and Pink is totally alone.
And that's what makes this song so powerful. Here's Pink, trapped inside this wall of his own making. And then suddenly he's desperate for connection. It's like he's realizing the consequences of his isolation, but he's not sure how to break free.
Right. The lyrics are full of this yearning for connection, but there's also this bitterness to them. Like when he sings, "Don't tell me there's no hope at all," it almost sounds like he's trying to convince himself as much as the person he's singing to.
Exactly. And Gilmour on Vinyls points out how this internal conflict plays out throughout the song. He's reaching out for connection, but he's also pushing people away, almost like he's afraid of being hurt again.
And what about that recurring image of worms? I always found that so haunting.
Oh yeah, it's brilliant. The worms represent decay, both physical and emotional. Igloo on Vinyls argues that they're not just a random image, they're directly connected to the wall itself. The wall might seem like protection, but it's actually a source of decay slowly eating away at Pink from the inside.
Wow. I never thought about it like that, but it makes so much sense. The wall isn't just a physical barrier, it's a symbol of Pink's declining mental state.
Right, and this idea of decay is also reflected in the way Pink talks about home throughout the song. Now, home could be interpreted a few different ways. It could be a literal place, like his childhood home or the family he's pushed away. But it could also represent something deeper, like a yearning for innocence before the wall went up.
So it's like he's longing for a sense of belonging, but he's not even sure what that looks like anymore.
Exactly. And this is where I Grew on Vinyls brings in some interesting outside connections. They link Pink's plea to carry the stone to the myth of Sisyphus, who was condemned to eternally roll a boulder uphill only for it to roll back down again. They argue that this reflects Pink's feeling of being trapped in this endless cycle of isolation and despair.
That's a cool connection. I also loved how they linked the line, "Don't bury the light," to a passage from the Gospel of Matthew. It adds another layer of meaning to the lyrics and shows how deeply Pink is struggling with these existential questions.
Right. It's not just about being sad and alone. It's about grappling with these bigger questions of meaning and purpose. I Glue on Vinyls highlights how Pink Floyd cleverly weaves these external references into the song to create a richer and more layered experience.
And it's not just the lyrics that convey this complexity. The music itself is structured in a way that mirrors Pink's emotional journey.
Absolutely. There's this recurring three-note rhythm that pops up throughout the album. And I Glue on Vinyl suggests it actually represents the wall itself. It's this constant oppressive presence that confines Pink even musically.
Then you have those incredible guitar solos, particularly Gilmour's. They're like these sudden bursts of raw emotion, almost like Pink trying to break free from the constraints of the wall.
They also point out something that I hadn't really considered before, the vocal interplay between Roger Waters and David Gilmour in Hey You. Unlike other songs in the album where they take on different characters, here they both embody Pink.
That is interesting. What do you make of that choice?
It's a great question. Is it meant to blur the lines between Pink and the voices in his head? Or is it simply a way to highlight the duality of his own psyche? It's open to interpretation, which is part of what makes the song so captivating.
So we have this incredibly powerful and complex song, but then comes the debate about its placement on the album. I Glue on Vinyls isn't afraid to criticize Hey You's spot on the wall, and they make some really thought-provoking points.
Yeah, they argue that placing Hey You directly after Goodbye Cruel World creates a jarring shift in Pink's emotional arc. He goes from utter isolation and indifference to this sudden, almost desperate plea for connection. It feels unearned and out of sync with his journey up to that point.
Yeah, I could see that. It's almost like he skips a step emotionally.
Exactly. I Glue on Vinyls argues that placing Hey You after Comfortably Numb would make much more sense narratively. In Comfortably Numb, Pink experiences a moment of vulnerability, almost like he's letting his guard down for a second. That would set the stage for Hey You and make his desire for connection feel more genuine and earned.
Okay, I'm starting to see their point. So what would happen to Goodbye Cruel World in this rearranged track list?
That's where it gets even more interesting. A Glue on Vinyls suggests grouping Hey You with the concert-themed songs on the album. Think about lines like Standing in the Aisles. They take on a whole new meaning when placed in the context of a concert setting. A Goodbye Cruel World could then serve as a more definitive ending to the first half of the album, marking Pink's complete withdrawal from the world.
That's a really interesting idea. It makes you wonder how much Pink Floyd considered the narrative flow when they were sequencing the album.
Right, and it raises a bigger question. How much does the order of songs influence our interpretation of a story? Can simply changing the placement of one song change our entire perception of a character's arc?
Now, before we move on, we can't forget about the film adaptation of The Wall, where Hey You was completely cut. I remember being surprised when I first saw the film and realized this iconic song was missing.
And I Glue on Vinyls actually defends that decision. They break down the deleted Hey You sequence from the film and argue that it doesn't really add anything meaningful to the story. They argue that the sequence relies too heavily on visuals that we've already seen elsewhere in the film. For example, there's a shot of Pink clawing at the bricks of his wall, which is a powerful image that we've already seen that symbolism in other scenes. It feels repetitive.
You know, I've always loved the visuals in The Wall, but I can see how that particular sequence might feel a bit redundant, especially for someone who's already familiar with the album.
Right, and the reviewers at Glue on Vinyls even point out how the riot scene that plays out during the guitar solo feels like a rehat of the imagery used in Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. It lacks the same visual punch because we've seen it before.
And what about those worms we talked about earlier? They're a pretty prominent visual motif throughout the film.
Exactly. They're already woven into the fabric of the film's visual language. So including them again during the Hey You sequence doesn't really add anything new. It's like the filmmakers were struggling to find a unique visual language for this particular song.
It sounds like the film adaptation of The Wall almost suffered from having too much visual material to work with. They couldn't include everything without it becoming repetitive.
That's a really interesting point. It makes you wonder if sometimes less is more, especially when you're adapting a work as visually and conceptually rich as The Wall.
Okay, so maybe cutting Hey You from the film was the right call. But even though it's not in the film, it's still fascinating to think about what the filmmakers were trying to achieve with that deleted sequence. It gives us another layer to consider when we're analyzing the song.
Absolutely. It's like getting a glimpse into the creative process, seeing what worked and what didn't. And it also highlights the subjective nature of art. What one person finds compelling, another might find redundant. Ultimately, it's up to each individual to decide how they experience and interpret a work of art.
Speaking of different interpretations, one thing that really struck me about the I Glue on Vinyls review was their discussion of the multiple meanings embedded in the lyrics. They point out how certain lines can be read in completely different ways depending on your perspective.
It's true. For example, when Pink sings, "Don't give in without a fight," is he trying to encourage himself to keep fighting against his isolation? Or is he projecting his own struggles onto someone else, perhaps even the audience listening to this music?
That's such a good point. It makes you wonder how much self-awareness Pink actually has at this point in the story. Is he genuinely trying to connect, or is he still trapped in this cycle of self-deception?
That ambiguity is part of what makes Hey You so fascinating. It's not a straightforward song with a clear-cut message. It's layered and complex, just like Pink's character. And as listeners, we're invited to engage with that complexity, to explore those different layers of meaning and draw our own conclusions.
And I Glue on Vinyls does a great job of guiding us through that process. They don't just give us one interpretation, they present us with multiple possibilities and encourage us to think critically about the lyrics.
Exactly. And I don't limit themselves to just the lyrics. They connect Pink's struggles to broader ideas, bringing in references to mythology, religion, and even Pink Floyd's own experiences with their fan base. It really enriches the analysis and gives us a deeper appreciation for the song's thematic depth.
I especially like their connection between the line, "Together we stand, divided we fall," and Pink's own self-imposed isolation. It's like he's stumbling upon the solution to his problem even as he's perpetuating it.
It's a beautiful example of irony, and it's something that a lot of us can probably relate to on some level. We crave connection, but we also build walls to protect ourselves, even if those walls end up isolating us further.
It's almost like Pink is a mirror reflecting our own struggles with vulnerability and connection.
Precisely. And I Glue on Vinyls really drives that point home by connecting Pink's internal conflict to the broader human experience. It's not just about one man's journey. It's about all of us, our fears, our hopes, and our desperate need to connect with each other.
It makes you wonder if Pink Floyd intentionally built all these layers of meaning into the song, or if it's something that emerged organically through the creative process.
That's the beauty of art, isn't it? It often transcends the intentions of its creators, taking on a life of its own and speaking to people in different ways across time and cultures.
And it's up to us as listeners and viewers to engage with those layers of meaning, to question, analyze, and ultimately come to our own conclusion.
Which is exactly what this deep dive has encouraged us to do. We've explored the song's meaning, its musical structure, its controversial placement on the album, and its absence from the film. We've debated the interpretations of the lyrics, delved into the symbolism, and considered the impact of artistic choices.
And throughout this whole discussion, we've been guided by Gilmour Vinyl's insightful analysis, which has really made me think about Hey You in a whole new light. It's a reminder that even songs you think you know inside and out can still hold surprises.
That's the power of a really good music review, isn't it? It can take a familiar song and reveal hidden depths, encouraging you to listen with fresh ears and a deeper understanding.
Exactly. And it's not just about the technical aspect of the music or the cleverness of the lyrics. It's about how those elements work together to create an emotional impact, how they connect with us on a personal level and make us think about our own lives and experiences.
That's what makes music so powerful. It can be both deeply personal and universal at the same time. And that brings us to the heart of what we've been exploring today. What does Hey You mean to you?
That's the question I want to leave you with today. Think about everything we've discussed, the themes of isolation and connection, the musical and lyrical choices that create such a powerful mood, the different interpretations of the lyrics, and the debate about its placement within the album. How does all of that resonate with you?
Does it offer a message of hope, or is it more of a cautionary tale? Does it make you think about the walls you might be building in your own life? Or perhaps the ways you've been able to break through those walls and connect with others?
There are no right or wrong answers here, only different perspectives. And that's the beauty of it all. Music, like all art, sparks conversations and invites us to engage with the world around us in new and meaningful ways.
So keep those conversations going, keep listening, keep questioning, and keep exploring. There's a whole world of music out there waiting to be discovered, dissected, and debated.
And if you're looking for a guide on that journey, I highly recommend checking out Gilmour Vinyls on YouTube. They do a fantastic job of bringing depth and insight to the music we love.
Until next time, keep those turntables spinning, those headphones on, and those minds open.